Lee here from Andertons TV. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today, I am joined by amp maker to the stars, amp maker extraordinaire, and the lovely chap, Joe Morgan.
Hi, everybody.
Hello. Welcome to the UK.
Thank you.
Thanks for getting up at 3 o'clock this morning to be here.
You know, I really wanted to see a London sunrise, so I got my wish.
Well, every time this is empty, just nod in that general direction and it will magically refill.
That's fantastic. This is a really good whiskey, by the way.
So, Morgan, I want to talk a little bit about, let's go back. Let's go back in time to when wee Joe was still in short trousers. Where did the fascination with electronics kind of come from?
Oh, that's a great question. This is a question I haven't answered. Like, nobody's really asked me to go all the way back. I started soldering when I was 9 years old. Mm-hmm. And I also had a love for guitar at the same time. So I talked my dad into buying me my first electric guitar, and it was this horrible Strat copy from a place called Kmart in the States, which is where you can buy diapers or car cleaning products or a Strat. And I bought me the guitar, and I realized that I needed an amplifier. Well, he wouldn't purchase the amp for me, but I figured out, mind you, I'm 9. I figured out that the phono input on his receiver, his stereo, would accept a low-level signal. So I went to a place called Radio Shack, and I got a 1/4-inch jack, and I disassembled my dad's phono input on his receiver, and I wired the 1/4-inch jack to it so that I could plug my guitar in. And I think that's my fascination with electronics really started there.
Right. Because that's such a common story, isn't it, of an era. So I'm guessing, what are we talking now, sort of 70s?
Yeah, that would have been 73.
Yeah, because there was a whole really probably going from the very early, sort of skiffle and rock and roll years in the 50s through to, probably the beginning of the 80s even, where manufacturers actually went, okay, we'll make little baby practice amps. And prior to that, there's loads of stories of people just going into cassette recorders or hi-fis or something like that.
Absolutely. I can remember the pig nose, like the little practice amps, the battery powered ones, and just wanting one of those so badly, just to have anything. And it's and that never changed. It's funny because from there, kept playing guitar, went through it, got my own little couple of small amps, and then as I played hardcore punk rock in the early 80s.
Right.
Of course I did. But with that, I was using some PVs that I had modified, just so that I could get more noise out of them.
Modified. So we're in the 80s now, and so you're talking about things like PV Bandits and all that kind of stuff being super popular.
Exactly.
Real kind of, I guess, probably the golden age for PV, wasn't it, that sort of time?
Yeah.
So what kind of, were you just modding your own? You were doing sort of to make them louder, more driven, just different
louder,
sounding?
more driven, to figure out how I can get it to drive more speaker cabinets, do whatever I could I wanted more drive, and I wanted louder.
So where did you find the information on how to do that?
I actually went to school and became an electrical engineer.
Right.
So it was kind of simultaneous.
Some sort of like formal training.
Yeah, so it was like I knew what a semiconductor was, and I knew the difference between a resistor and a capacitor.
Right.
And
handy.
Yeah, and the amps used to come with schematics.
They did, didn't they? Like the back page of a PV manual or a Fender manual was the schematic, wasn't it?
Which was awesome. They don't do that anymore.
No. It's, I guess, probably because there isn't one. It's just a chip. It's like there is no schematic. It's just a program.
Yeah, you just go in a menu.
Yeah.
Right.
And then, so were you modding? Did you have a sort of a fascination of valve amplifiers, or was it just any kind of amplifier you could get your hands on?
Well, when I was going to school, they showed us. Instructor brought in some tubes and said, most of you guys will never see these in your life.
Yeah.
We spent 2 weeks on them. I really didn't have a fascination with tubes until the early 90s. Yeah. When I had stopped playing guitar for about 10 years and then got back into it. So I went out and I bought an ESP LTD, Kirk Hammett, you know, and a Galen Kruger backline 250.
Of course.
Yeah, the quintessential tone machine.
You could have given me 1,000 guesses, and I would never have ended up with those two.
Well, so I'm watching Allman Brothers live at the Fillmore, and I'm having a total disconnect because that wasn't happening here, right? So I went into a mom and pop guitar store near me, and the guy that was working there, Jesse, he was like 70 years old, toured around the world and been a roadie, and like he just smelled like music, right? So I asked Jesse, I go, hey, how do I get here? What's the deal? And he didn't say a word to me, but he grabbed a Les Paul off the wall and took me in a back room where they had a 4-hole Marshall 100 water on a 4x12 with greenbacks, turned everything up to 10 and handed me the guitar, right? And then it was like, oh, that was the epiphany between, okay, there's something happening here with this particular combination. And then it was, okay, what did Brian May do?
Right.
You know, and then it was like, you know, what is a Telecaster straight into a Tweed? So I'm like, oh, look, I'm Keith Richards.
Oh, and where were you living then?
Then I was in Huntington Beach.
Okay, so there's a good scene already, plenty of opportunity to meet, you know, cool musicians.
When I was hardcore punk rock, early days was Minneapolis, Minnesota. Mm-hmm. So I was there. We were on Husker Du's record label, the guys in the Replacements and like Soul Asylum, those bands. Yeah. That was what was happening there at that time, and all good friends. And then I moved to California, left that life behind me, you know, got a BMW and a sailboat, started working for a company called Rockwell International on the first GPS satellites.
Right.
You know, really tried to live that yuppie crown, you know, leave my old ways behind me. You know, met my wife, got married, and started having kids.
That's amazing. Again, I love these kind of interviews because you know, I think people's perception about, you know, where people have come from and backgrounds, it's always great to, you know, people throw you a curveball and you go, okay, I didn't see that coming.
Right.
But so presumably then at some point you've still got your regular job, but you've got this love affair going on with amps. You've got this electrical engineering kind of background. Did you just start with a little repair shop or something, doing stuff for friends?
No, my wife was working. She was at the time she was working for hotels, and she was doing some on-call stuff. But as generally she'd be gone on Friday and Saturday nights, and our kids were young, so I'd be there with the kids. And I had gone through a bunch of gear, and you know, it's like I really kind of found what I liked and what I didn't like, and it was old vintage style single channel amplifiers were kind of my thing. So I said, well, I'm going to buy a kit.
Right.
And I'm going to build an amp, and I'm going to take my time on it, enjoy it while you're gone. I'll have a couple of beers, and you know, if it takes me a month or 2 months, whatever, to finish it, that'll be great. So I, GDS, remember the GDS kits from the 90s?
No, I think so.
It was like an 18-watt Marshall thing.
Right.
All right. So I got the kit, and like 4 hours later, I had an amp. And I'm like, okay, this seemed a little simple.
Yeah.
And then, you know, started understanding a little bit more about, okay, how the valves operate. That's tubes to you in the U.S.
Yes.
And started really, I got with the old RCA tube receiver manual. And in that book, there are a bunch of like linear curves for different voltages and stuff for different tubes. And I started to realize that, okay, depending on how I manipulate these things, you know, I can get some clipping and like the top end of the, when you're running a sine wave through, I can just clip the tops, or I can just clip the bottoms, or keep it all even, or I can, you know, and then it just kind of snowballed out of control.
Sort of tuning it then to taste. So, but what was at this stage, it's still just for your own personal hobby, something to do?
Screwing around, yeah.
So what was the moment then where, you know, what happened to, you know, because there must be hundreds of people in the world, thousands of people in the world who aspire to give up their, maybe not to give up their day jobs, but they'll be buying these kits, whether it's guitars or amps or pedals or whatever, and they're tweaking away. You know, what happens then to go from, you know, guy in doing it for fun to you know, having your first saleable product? You know,
I think one is finding your voice, finding your ear. And I went through a period of, in 2 years, I bought like 500 amps. And I mean, I would buy a $10,000 two-rock.
where were you as a customer for Andertons at this time?
John Sir from Sir Guitars nicknamed me Trader Joe because he just saw me going through like all this gear, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And what I was doing was I was learning. You know, we're learning more about me and a lot about the amps, but really what I liked and what I didn't like. At this time, I wasn't doing it so that I could, you know, try to build the ultimate amp and world domination and make a guitar company. But that $10,000 two rock and the $3,000 two rock with the same feature set, I'm like, what makes them different? And then the $3,000 one actually sounded better to me than the $10,000 one. So then was it tubes, because they're using the same tubes, swapping them back and forth, doing all this stuff, looking at the caps they're using, looking at the construction, just like what's going on here. And I did that with like literally everything, from the Gurlitz amps to old Tweeds and whatnot.
So you're obviously, I mean, I'm 100% concur with you in the same. I mean, if you take the name that most people will be familiar with for insanely expensive amplifiers, Dumbles.
Right.
I don't know what kind of guitar player you've got to be to get a good sound out of one of those, but like a player like me, that would be like the worst amp. You know, I'd rather have a Fender Hot Rod Deluxe or something, you know.
Yeah, that's
I get
the
what
emperor
you're
has
saying.
no clothes at a certain point.
But then you give the amp to John Mayer or
Right.
you know, Robin Ford, and then all of a sudden magic happens. But I get what you're saying about this idea of, you know, 10,000 versus 3,000 versus 500 or whatever. You know, there's no correlation between price and a sound that you're going to definitely like. There is only different flavors of sound, and you've just got to find what you like.
Find what you like. And there's also there's a whatever the market will bear. Because I have good friends that have spent like tens of thousands of dollars on particular like old Dumbles and stuff. And you know, Dumble was an interesting cat. Is an interesting cat. He makes an amp for a specific person at a specific time for their instruments and everything else. So that amp might work really great for somebody, but it may not work for anybody else, right? And for the kind of money people were throwing at it, it just, I mean, at that point you're buying collectibles, right? It's no longer about what the, you know, what it sounds like. I think to a certain extent, it's just that you're owning a piece of history and you're going to be able to sell it for more than you bought it for in 5 years. Yeah. But, you know, back to the whole voicing thing, it was really, you know, finding me and all of that, right? And then being comfortable with that.
And so who was that? Who were the... Sorry, go on, you were going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say the thing that bridged the gap, though, between going from, like, I built probably 20 amps under a different moniker. And the only reason I gave them a logo at all is because I would sell them to buy more parts to build a different type of amp, right? Like, oh, I want to build a train wreck. You know, I want to build an overdrive special. I want to... So I'd sell that and do something else. So being a huge Vox nerd, I have an EL84 tattooed on my arm.
Can we see it?
Yeah,
sure. Shows the EL. Oh, it's not a small EL84 either, is it?
No, so it's, I mean, when you're 50 and you're getting your first tattoo, you have problems. Mine are EL84s, evidently. So, being a huge Vox fan, a few glasses of wine, I'm on the internet. JMI.com hadn't been taken. And JMI was the original Jennings musical instruments, right? So every AC30 said a JMI product on it. And they had a logo that was 3 slanted rectangles. So I looked that up, and Music Ground still owned the trademark to that. Yeah. So I was pretty bummed, but they didn't have JMI.com, so I bought that because, you know, Joe Morgan Industries.
Of course.
Of course. And then I made my logo as 3 slanted ovals. Totally different.
Totally different.
So there are probably 20 amps out there with a JMI logo on it like that.
Cool.
And somebody said to me, after I built my first AC20 and they wanted to buy it from me, you should start an amp company.
Right.
And I said, absolutely not. There are too many amp companies already. I enjoy doing this. I've got a great job, company car, expense account. I don't need to, like, you know, throw into that pit of vipers. And I had a caveat, though. But if I did, I'd want the cabinet maker from Divided by 13 because his stuff, those are the best cabinets I ever heard in my life.
Right.
But, you know, like, I can't call up Fred and say, hey, who's your cabinet maker? I want to start an amp company, right? So, I don't know, it's probably a month or two later, my daughter was selling a drum set. And the guy that came over to buy the drum set walked into my garage, saw my amp parts, and said, hey, you build guitar amps? I make all the cabinets for Divided by 13.
That's when you know.
Yeah, that's
someone
when
up
it's
there's
like,
just going, I'm going to make this happen.
Yeah.
It's like, how weird is that?
Yeah, it was.
Well, do you know what?
strange.
I want to talk technical, and I'm conscious of the fact that we'll have to do some playing at some point so that people can hear this stuff. But so I guess the first thing, certainly the products in the Morgan catalogue that, if you like, are your, I don't know what you want to call them, like your heritage or your core sort of models.
Right.
There's a Vox vibe going on there.
The big thing is the touch sensitivity, you know, just the being able to, with a good right hand, being able to emote from a very clean note to a very overdriven note just by how hard you're hitting the strings or how hard you're digging in. And with the EL84, that small bottle tube and the way it compresses, it lends itself more to that. You'll get more of a dynamic jump in that than you would, say, if I put a pair of, you know, 6 L6s or a pair of EL34s in the same type of, you know, the configuration. Both those amps will do that, but not to the degree that the EL84 will.
Because I think when you think of Fender and Marshall, you can see the sort of the family tree and the point at which it kind of splits, right. and even though I think Fender and Marshall have almost gone on to be considered as almost like the polar opposites of amps, it's like they really aren't, you know, in the sense of the, the sort of design. And yet Vox is definitely, it is somewhere else sort of over here, isn't it? And just a bit different.
It is. It absolutely is. And that company has just such a rich heritage in those old designs. It's you know, like for me, a purist is, I think Top Boost ruined the AC30.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So you like to go back, you know, early doors?
Yeah, I give me the, well, anytime we add tone controls to an amp, we're not adding tone, we're subtracting it, right? Yeah. So, but to compete with a Fender and a Marshall that had tone controls, you know, it's hard to tell people, well, yeah, here's your volume and here's your cut. Yeah. But the mid-range on those were right, and they cut through right, and they record right.
Do you think there's an element of how do you hit that balance, though, between amps that are real players' amps designed to work in a band context, but that so many modern guitar players will either just own an amp to play around themselves at home, or maybe even if that's not the purpose of the amp, the situation in which they'll first try the amp, you know, in a store will be on their own. And those amps quite often are tough to get like a gratifying tone out of, or do you just not feel? Do you just think if you know what you're listening for, you will hear
No,
it as soon as
I agree with you 100%, but I think part of that disconnect comes from manufacturing process that we have today for, you know, most of the stuff that's being made. And I mean, when we talk about like the stuff back in the 60s, they weren't necessarily trying to build the world's greatest sounding amplifier with the world's greatest parts. They were trying to fill orders and build as many as they can to make money, right? The thing that they had going in their favor, electronic components at that time and tubes at that time, you know, we hadn't figured out how to make them really, really, really cheap.
Right.
Right. So the stuff that they were using was still, you know, top quality, even if they got a special deal on it. I think today, now that we've figured out how to make, you know, the glass wall as thin as possible on a tube, you know, they don't hold up very well. It's like, I heard JJ does something ridiculous. Like they scrap 80% of their production, and then the 20% gets sold, right? If you have that as a business model, you know, if you threw away 80% of the guitars that came in here and just sold 20%.
But that is the tube, you know, this whole, I mean, if you take the idea that, you know, there are still stocks of old tubes around, old Mallards and stuff like that. If you take new tubes, regardless of the brand you buy,
Right.
they're all coming from the same one or two places,
Right.
and it is the grading that you pay for. So if JJ is
Right.
if the JJ
Absolutely.
tube is 3 times as expensive or 4 times as expensive as a cheap tube, it will be because for every 100 tubes they buy, they throw 80 away and they sell the 20 good ones.
Right, exactly.
But I know what you mean. Tubes is frustrating, and there's I was interviewing Dave. I'm going to get his surname wrong now. It's either Dave Clark, I think it is, but Vox, one of the Vox design guys. And he was saying in Europe, one of the concerns is that there'll be some new sweeping law about the efficiency of electrical products or whatever.
Right.
And the tube will just get caught up in this sort of it's a totally inefficient way of turning electricity into something.
Yes, you can't use tubes anymore.
Yeah, and
right?
it'll just be like, well, you just can't. Or one of the big, there's only 2 big factories left in the world. One of those goes bust, and all of it, or whatever. And I think they are. That's why Vox have put so much research into trying to do this new tube thing, and regardless of whether you like the sound of it or not, or you think it sounds authentic or not, it's really by the by. It's just the fact that they're trying to
they're looking
design
down
an
the line,
alternative,
trying to figure out a different way to solve the problem of the components that we have to deal with today, and the likelihood that they'll be phased out. Gosh, I hope we never see that day.
Yeah,
because there's something about that tube, just the way it compresses and the way that every tube's like a snowflake. They're all different. You take 100 JJs and put them in that V1 slot one at a time, and your guitar tone's going to sound vastly different, right? Go find an old Mullard and throw it in there. And
I think to a certain extent, look, if one of those big Far Eastern or Eastern European factories goes bust, I think somebody somewhere will go, I'm going to start making tubes, and even if they're $200 each, there'll be a market somewhere up in the sort of the top end that just goes, well, if in order to keep my Super Lead going or my old AC30 going, I've just got to spend $1,000 every time I revalve it. I guess it just but the market, I mean, obviously it'll become unbelievably niche and top end, and
and then the stereo guys will get the best of the best, like always, right? And then
with their $2,000 gold cables and absolutely. Let's focus in now. So AC20,
right?
The name is a giveaway, I guess,
Yeah,
as to where its sort
is.
of roots and heritage is. Was this the first kind of Morgan amplifier? Or?
Yeah, as far as I think the very, very first production model I made was an amp called the MV 3.8K. Yeah, it was a master volume 3800, meaning that it was an AC30, but I also had a switch on it where it changed the gain structure to make it like a JCM 800.
Yeah.
So it had if you wanted it, it had ridiculous amounts of high gain overdriven tone, or it could have been a straight up AC30.
Yeah. No, go on. Now you finish, because I'm terrible in these interviews. I'm just thinking every time you say something, I must ask Joe that, but then I'll forget if I don't ask you straight away. But I'll try and remember. You keep going.
But the AC20 happened. I was actually playing at a really large church in Southern California, and I had to be there at 7:00, and it was 3 p.m, and I didn't have an amp, but I had a chassis that had the transformers in it, and it had EL84 tube sockets and 12X7s, and I'm like, what can I build in here really quick? I'll just throw a normal channel of a Vox.
I love the idea of building an amp just before you do the gig, just quickly.
Well, yeah, it's church. It's not like anybody's coming to see me. So, it took me about a half hour, 45 minutes to throw it in there. And
Right.
yeah, but most of the work was done. I mean, most of the wiring was already in the thing.
That's cool. But the question I was going to ask you is, you mentioned this. So many amp manufacturers try and do these hybrid amps. It sounds like a Vox, and you press this switch, it sounds like a Marshall, or you press this switch, it sounds like something else. I mean, it's almost the holy grail, isn't it? Everybody wants that amp. But I think I'm coming to the conclusion that it's just fundamentally
Impossible?
not possible to do that unless...
I have a great analogy for you.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorites. Okay, 12AX7. Almost every amplifier being manufactured today, that's your preamp tube, right?
Yeah.
So whether it's a Vox, Marshall, Fender, we're talking 12AX7. If you think of 12AX7 like chicken, and then what we do on the back end, whether it's barbecue, curry, or fried, that's what makes a Vox, a Fender, Fender, a Marshall, right? Yeah. It's how we process that chicken, and what we do with that tone coming from the 12AX7s, that really defines the characteristics of the amplifier. And I get the email at least once a week, dude, really like your stuff, I need a 3-channel amp, Fender Clean, Marshall Crunch, and Bogner Overdrive. Can you build me something like that? Yeah. No, I'm not that guy. That's not...
Isn't that where you just go and buy a Kemper? I mean, I know I've sworn, obviously, in a video, if I'm standing next to Joe Morgan and I say the word Kemper, I'm surprised it hit.
No, it's funny. I posted a picture of a Kemper modeler on my Instagram this week, and it had said something about its memory being full, can't accept it.
Oh, I saw that. Yes.
Right, and I didn't expect it to get to be such a rabid debate against analog. I was just having a little bit of fun, but I don't hate that stuff at all.
Well, so I posted a Kemper thing. This is about 18 months ago on mine, and you can work it out yourself. One was a picture of an extremely voluptuous-looking woman, and the other was your hand. And that was basically... But
I think I saved it. I think I have that picture on my phone now.
To be honest with you, I'm an irrational... honestly, if you blind... I mean, you may be different. I would hope that you are with your experience of building amps and, all that kind of stuff. But if you blindfold me and we play 10 amplifiers and 5 of them are a Kemper profile and 5 are the real amps, I can't tell you which ones are which anymore. It's just, it is what it is. But I irrationally still don't want one. I still have this sort of this desire to, I guess to a certain extent, it's the same with, I don't want guitars that are headless and where you tune them down here, or that have, I don't care how good they are.
But I saw a really cool one without a headstock on it and that had fan frets, but it was butterscotch blonde with a black pickguard.
I don't know.
I about screamed like,
maybe.
No!
But so look, if we focus on the AC20 then, so this was your original one, which tried to do the sort of Marshall.
Yeah, that was a little bit
thing.
over the top.
So this is very much now just trying to capture some of the magic of like an early AC15 or something, is it? Or?
This is what it's really doing is that original AC30 that had like an EF86 channel, a normal channel, and brilliant channel. Mm-hmm. This amp is super simple. It's got a volume and a cut control, and the cut just takes high end out of the power section. Mm-hmm. The 2 switches on the front of this one, if they're both down, it's a normal channel. If they're both up, it's a brilliant channel. But because they're switches, you can have the high end of the brilliant channel and the bass of the normal channel.
Right, okay.
Which is how I have it set up for you right now.
I mean, I'm keen to do this sort of pick attack kind of experiment.
Yeah.
So that's me picking softly.
Yeah.
Like a medium, and you can hear the hair, can't you? Almost the fuzz. And then I guess if I
it's all there.
It's pretty dynamic. I mean, I don't think I've really done that experiment on a Fender or a Marshall, but in your experience, you just find it isn't there, that level of dynamics.
Right.
There.
I think on a really good version, and a really good tube amplifier where you're worried more about the components and the overall tone, as opposed to like just building for feature sets. You'll be able to get that. But on an amp with no negative feedback and where the tubes are driven in 100%, I'm going to call it Class A cathode bias, which is kind of more of an industry term because it really isn't Class A.
Right.
So don't send me the emails. But yeah, that's it. It just means that tube's running hot all the time, and it can respond to exactly what you're doing. And then, since there's no negative feedback, which we say negative feedback, it's just we're sending literally from the output jack of the speaker, we send a trickle current back into the circuit as like a wave crashing in on itself, right? So it gets rid of oscillations, it gets rid of a lot of the super high end first, because that's the more delicate part of the signal. Crushes even order harmonics, so it makes it a rounder tone. So when you like the Fender, which has a ton of negative feedback, you know, that's that. It's going to want to try to stay clean. It's going to want to try to self-correct itself. And Marshall is kind of in between, you know, that Fender and that Vox with the amount of feedback that they use. So they get a little woolly and a little out of control again, right? Yeah. But that's all part of that. But leaving it wide open gives you the highest dynamic range and the most. Yeah. But it also makes them a little bit harder to play for people who don't have a good right hand.
I was just about to say that. I mean, that for me is one of the things I like about you know, something like a modern Fender, or even like a deluxe Reverb or something like that. They are quite forgiving, you know, that you can kind of, you know, you can do these, particularly with the reverb and stuff, you can do these quite big lush kind of chords and stuff like that. And I've never been a massive Vox fan, although again I think when you hear them in a band context, or you hear them used with pedals and stuff, they make great kind of just like blank canvas amps to just sort of do stuff with. But yeah, it's a you know, I mean, like trying to sound like Brian May is just the impossible, you know, number of videos we've done where we go, right, we're going to try and sound like Brian May. It's just like, forget it, you know, it's just like that's just it's just not possible to capture that.
Normal channel, set up pretty dark, out of phase single coils, and a treble booster.
And you're there, are you?
Yeah. Like,
well,
yeah.
Well, we should. Well, look. So the AC20. Now, this became just hugely popular, and you mentioned you were playing in the church with your thing. You kind of, for a while, became known as like
the worship
brand, you know, to have. Was that like a good thing or a bad thing, or didn't really matter?
It's just kind of a thing. It really didn't matter to me because, I mean, at least stateside, the church was the new bar gig. Because, you know, there are so many guys that still wanted to play, still wanted a chance to play live and play out and that kind of thing. And it became easier for their wives to swallow, and more socially acceptable to be going to church.
So I'm
and
not
playing
going out
in a
Friday
band.
night, I'm going out Sunday morning now.
Yeah, exactly, okay. Yeah. But I think both can be destructive. I mean, it's like, look at me! You know, I can play Humble Thyself better than anybody! So, right, it's... So I think you still have to keep yourself in check either way.
Oh, fair enough. But so about 4 years ago, maybe, or was it more than that? You did a deal to, I guess, increase your ability to sort of make the amps, and the range that has allowed you. The range has now gone from pretty small, focused around perhaps some of those original AC kind of vibes, to now having, you know, what, 20 plus amps in the range.
It's funny because it came back down. Because when you're doing it by yourself, when you're and somebody calls up and they want something, you think it's a really cool idea. Yeah, I'll build it. You know, it'll be X. And then you build it and you give it a model name and you move on, and somebody says, yeah, I want one of those. Okay, all right, I'll build you one of those. I'll build you one of these. And then you get to the point where it's so funny, you know, I give this example quite a bit, but it's hard as a manufacturer to go from some guy that's doing it as a hobby in his garage, selling direct to 20 guys, to being able to support dealers worldwide. It's a huge jump, and a huge learning curve as well. But within that, you know, you have to go, okay, I can't make all these models. I can't be so much individually focused on every single amp. So yeah, it was about 4 years ago now that I jumped in with Boutique Amps Distribution, and they have like 100,000 square foot facility. With my contract with them is they do my manufacturing and distribution. I still make custom shop models. I'll still do custom one-offs for guys, and that's now fun for me. But I don't have to solder jockey, you know, 20 AC 20s a day. But the cool part is with our contract, it's same process, it's same vendors, it's same parts, and they nailed it. They absolutely nailed it. They actually make their better quality now than when I was building, because the guy that's putting it together isn't answering the phone, checking emails. And,
why wouldn't you? Just, if you're going to, you do the designs, get a professional manufacturer to do the manufacturing, get a professional sales team to do the sale. It's like, why not just get people who are good at what they do to do what they're supposed to do?
But I think, though, that, finding a team that can do the hand wiring and then is willing to work with, like, hey, why don't we use these parts? Or, they're like 10% of the cost.
Yeah.
Like, well, those parts suck.
Yeah.
So, but somebody that's willing to hang in with that and keep the same process, they're like a unicorn. I can't think of another company that takes in outside people like that can keep that manufacturing process.
I think that is now, without wanting to offend billions of people. I think that's the kind of badge of honor that you get when you still buy made in America or made in the UK or something. Which where there is that sense of, look, we didn't just go, well, this component's a tenth of the cost of this component and no one will notice, so let's just use this one.
Yeah. Or maybe 9 out of 10 people won't notice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So there is that.
I'm building for that 10th guy.
Yes. And I get it now. People will go, I don't understand. This is 4 times the price of the thing I can go and buy that's produced in the Far East.
Right.
And it doesn't, to me or to that, it doesn't sound 4 times as good or be 4 times as loud or 4 times as anything.
Right.
And I think to a certain extent you've got to go, that's fine if you don't, if you can't hear it or you don't get it or whatever, then that's fine. And I don't want to put anything about Far East and made amps down. But it is in there. It is in there, and if you can find it and you can hear it, and your style of play or your other gear that you own justifies it, it is still worth it. It's just, if you just compare number of knobs or power output or something like that, you're never ever going to justify buying an American or a British made product versus a Far Eastern made product.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as I'm really cognizant about the price point of my amplifiers and learning to modding those PVs and not have enough money to buy a Marshall stack back in the day, right? I want to be able to bring that quality of sound down to the bottom price that I can do it at. And every time I make a building decision, every dollar that I spend ends up costing the customer like $4. And I know that, right? So every dollar I spend, I know it's going to be a much harder decision for the guy at the end. And I mean, and I'm lucky because I don't have a lot of overhead. I don't have, offices all over the world, and I'm not, throwing out amplifiers to a million artists. So my overhead is fairly low, where some of these guys, for every dollar that they spend, it's going to cost the customer 10. Yeah. And I'm going to make a decision that's just purely based on tone. So it may not have a speaker simulated output and 900 switches, but it's going to sound good.
I think there's a volume, as in quantity. If you're making 500 of a certain amp a year, and somebody comes along and says, look, I can find this component for $2 less, and you go, it's $1,000. It's just like, it's not worth it. If you're making 50,000 of those a year, and someone says, I can find this component for $2 less, you go, okay, that's $100,000 saving. So I get.
Yeah, I get the process too, and if you have shareholders to answer to, that's a big part of it as well. I mean.
But I'm still, I think whether it's amps or guitars or pedals or whatever, there's no doubt that for guys who are shopping, with a smaller budget, are getting, without doubt, best quality product they've ever had, best value for money, best bang for buck ever.
Absolutely.
And it does inevitably make it more difficult to justify the sort of the premium stuff. But I think you've just got to sit in there and go, and look, relatively speaking, is any of this stuff really expensive? If you have a Morgan Amp for life, which it will last longer than you will, and you sit there going, okay, so it cost me $2,000 or $2,500 or whatever like that. It's like, well, divide that up by the number of hours you're going to use it and make a decision as to whether or not you think that's good or bad value. And I suspect it will inevitably come out as Well, that's pretty fair, you know.
There was a YouTuber recently that just, big YouTuber, and he put out a video, Does Gear Matter? And his response was, kind of, but don't worry about it. And I think that if you're chasing gear to chase gear, I mean, and that's what you want to do, cool. You know what? Go buy I bought a $10,000 two rock because I wanted to know, right?
Yeah.
Go do that. I think you should do that. If you have the means to do it, absolutely. Go have fun, make that your hobby, and right. But as a musician, just like the part for me that is the single most joyful moment is when I get a player to sit down at an amplifier and he plays it for 20, 30, 45 minutes and never touches it. Never once adjusts the volume or the tone controls, you know, and that's happened more times than I can count. You know, and for me, I feel like when a musician can make music, you know, and I get out of the way, right? When the products that he's using get out of the way, that just makes more music as opposed to just making things louder.
Yeah. Nobody ever bought an album because the guitar amp the guy used was the best guitar amp, did they? It's just...
I may have.
Well, so let's I mean, we'll come back to doing some tones on this and we'll intersperse them into the video. But so MVP 23 is not new, but it's newer.
Right.
Where are we going with this?
Okay, I'm back on the thought of trying to develop an amplifier that is more attainable in a price point, right? And I'm going to speak in US dollars just because that's all I know.
I don't think there's a big difference between what the dollar price is and what the pound price is.
So in a head version, this is $1,500, which for me, you know, my least expensive head was $2,000. So coming down $500, I'm basically throwing everything off the airplane that isn't necessary so we can get it off the ground as quick as we can. But the MVP 23 is a 23 watt EL84 full tone stack complement with a gain and a master volume, but that's for the MV, and the MVP is master volume.
Not the most valuable player, or
no,
it's
just funny, but the P is for the power level control, which is the power scaling on the amp. So with this amp, it gets around a bunch of, you can get clean tones out of it.
The snap is there, isn't it? And it's like, that's the thing that you hear, you know, if you play soft, but if you dig in, it is that snap and that instant,
that little thing on the front, right? That's, again, this one has no negative feedback. This amp is kind of got like a 1974 18 watt Marshall front end, but the back end is the same phase inverter I use in my SWs, so it's like Dumble.
Right.
But then the power section is really more like a Vox power section. So it's this amalgamation of three worlds that, you know,
three worlds collide.
Yeah, exactly. But it has a ton of gain on tap. And the cool thing with that power level control, I can bring it down so you and I can talk.
Crazy.
Right?
But that, to me, that feels like the dog is straining on the leash to be like, let me go.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
It's not what this amp is all about, is it? You know.
No, it's one of those things though. But with that power level control, I can set it clean, right? I can use it with my pedal board. If I'm playing a gig and I'm up here, right? And I'm being yelled at by the sound guy, I can kick it down. It's exactly the same. There's nothing else going on. I'm changing the voltage like a zoom lens on a camera. So the amp can only produce a certain level out, but it won't change. Like with your pedal board, you won't have to redo like a lot of power scaling amps. You have to reset all your pedals and your delay things. You don't have to do any of that with this one.
Do you think it's a sort of a throwback to the sort of the worship music thing, that you just don't feel the need to put reverb on all your amps? Is it just?
Oh no, I have reverb on a bunch. It's funny because remember the Tony Bruno amp that they did with Vox?
Yes.
Right. I was their customer, a vintage Vox guy who wanted a hand-wired EC30 built with today's stuff that was reliable. That you know.
And I remember that amp. You know why I remember it? Because it had a switch on it called Macho. And I just thought, immediately, I could have told you before you even made the first one that you'll never sell one of those.
Right.
Nobody wants a guitar amp with a Macho switch on it. So yes, at least over here, they were a massive flop.
No, they were a massive flop everywhere. Right. It had a master volume and reverb on it.
Right. Just like so instant Vox owners are like, what are you doing?
Yeah. I mean, for, you know, the guys with EL84s tattooed on their arm, that was a deal breaker.
Although I kind of like where Vox have ended up now. I mean, I know, I think it is a shame that Vox don't see the UK as an important part of the manufacturing heritage, and all they ever do is periodically they'll do a limited run out of here. And I kind of think it's a little bit of a shame that, you know, like your regular AC30 is made in the Far East. But
you kind of have to do that though to be able to hit the price point. Yeah,
absolutely. You know, you want to make an amp for $1,000. It's like, it's what do you do? But I do like, in all fairness with him, I like the reverb and the features they've got on the new... Because the AC30 kind of has had two versions since it moved to the Far East. Mm-hmm. The first one was like, you know what guitar players need? They need switching channels and this and reverb. And that just bombed. Yeah. And the current one was kind of like, oh, I didn't really... You know, AC30 guys don't want all that. But they left the reverb, and I kind of like... Thank you.
Well, you're a reverb guy. Yeah, you know, and that's, I mean, just different camps, right? It's the, you know, I've had a couple emails recently. Hey, would you put reverb on this? Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, I've done it before. No problem. Do it.
Because there's no loop on this, is there?
No.
Yeah. So you again.
Effects loops are the devil.
The effect loop is the devil.
Think about it. It's the point in the signal chain where we have the highest like. Dynamic range. It's the point where we hand over the preamp signal to the power section, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that, and then I'm going to let you run it through some kind of outboard device, which is typically digital. Yeah. And then I had somebody run a micro amp.
Like the MXR.
Yeah, the little white box, right? And then he, you know, sent me an email. He goes, "What's wrong with my loop? When I step on this, it doesn't make it louder. It cuts it in half." I said, "Well, yeah. That MXR has got a frequency range like this. You're taking this frequency range, right, and you're getting rid of half your signal."
I mean, again, I should say, you know, this is all horses for courses and everything.
Right,
and obviously,
right.
Joe's got a vibe. He likes to make amps in a certain way, and other manufacturers will have different vibes. And at the end of the day, it's whatever you like. I've used effects loops many times and had good success. And equally, though, I've had effects loops that you're right. As soon as you plug something in, all of a sudden you just go, nah.
Well, I think that's what the effects loop does, right? So if you're using an amp where you're getting all of your tone from that preamp section, right, and your power amp is just kind of there to like give you some volume, you know, great. You know, I have no problem with that. But when you look at somebody like the Edge, who uses more effects than anybody in the world, and he uses what, an AC30 and a Fender Deluxe Tweed, that neither one of those amps, right?
I think as long as you're not getting too much gain out of the actual amplifier, you can just chuck everything in the front end and everything's okay.
And that's you're familiar with Tosin Abasi?
Yeah.
All right, so Tosin, you know, his Fractal rigs, he just tossed them to the side.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say you plugged them into Morgan amps. So I was going to go, that would be weird.
Oh, we started there.
Yeah.
Well, we had the same conversation. He played one of my amps at Seymour Duncan, and it was like, wait, what's happening here? Like, I have a connection now with my guitar I didn't have before. Yeah. Came to the shop, and he was like, you know, I really want to get into your product. Can you make me one with an FX loop? I said, sure. So I made an SW50 with an FX loop, and he came by, and, you know, we plugged into an SW50 without an FX loop, played it, goes, yeah, that's great. Mm-hmm. We went to the one with the FX loop. It sounds the same. Okay, we're going to plug the Fractal into it. And he goes, whoa, what happened? Mm. And I'm like, well, again, the conversation. And so I said, well, try this. We're going to plug it into the front. He plugged it in the front. He goes, oh, that's usable. And then eventually he uses those for an acoustic thing he does now.
Yeah.
But everything's on the board, on the floor. And I don't know. That's my philosophy and where I come from. And I just like somebody needs a 3-channel amp.
Yeah.
You know, somebody's going to need an effects loop too.
Yeah, well, I mean, do you know what I would like to do, just to sort of demonstrate that, and because I'm feeling naked with no reverb here, can we grab a reverb pedal and just put it in the front? We've plugged in a reverb pedal.
And got more whiskey.
Yes, absolutely. So MVP is the sort of the most affordable, or one of the more affordable.
Yeah, one of them.
PR5.
Yeah, I have AC20 non-deluxe.
Yeah.
And the MVP 23, which are more affordable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm trying to get down to $1,000 combos so that people, kids in high school can afford one. I'm not quite there yet.
Yeah, I'm not sure. You see, I think if you look at the guitar market, that $1,000,
right,
it really blurs then, because you're going. You can do it out of America if you want,
right,
but it's so stripped back to nothing.
Yeah.
Whereas you sort of go, and you get so much for your money if you go Far East. I mean, I look at guitar brands that go, yeah, here's $1,000 American guitar, and I'm a bit like, I don't know, man. I think that's the tipping point. I think 1,500 is the kind of, you can go, look, we can make this in America. We can still be proud of it. It doesn't feel like it's had all the good stuff taken out of it just to hit a price point.
Right.
And $1,000, I'm trying to think if there's anything coming out of the States where I really go, they've now. I mean,
I can't do it.
Yeah,
I do it right now if I could do it, but I can't.
Yours, what's the wiring inside? Is it using PCBs or turret board?
No, it's all hand.
It is all hand.
wire.
Yeah, so you're never gonna. I mean, that's the only way you'll shave another $200 or $300 off is just basically do PCB versions of it.
Yeah, and these, I mean, I'm running the same caps, and the caps are like $5 a piece. They're really fancy,
expensive.
Yeah, but I mean, that's anything that carries that signal, any that waveform that you're making when you hit a string.
Yeah,
that I want to cradle that all the way out to the speaker.
Yeah, I think there's an element that says, look, I wouldn't. I just think, hey, Lee Anderton's school of how to build amplifiers to someone that's already doing it way more successfully than I've ever done. But yeah, I just feel it's just not necessary. Or if you really want to do it, reintroduce the JMI thing or whatever, and do something in the Far East and just work with a high quality and hit a price point by doing that. But
you don't think that lessens the quality of the overall brand?
I think it's important to do the sort of the Squier Fender thing, right, so that people, I certainly think that, if you went back 15 years and you said, I've got a PRS guitar, immediately I would just be like, well, it's obviously a good one, because they don't make anything that isn't good. And now if you say I've got a PRS guitar, my next question is, well, is it an American one or is it a Far Eastern one? Because it's a bit like, oh man, does it really matter? And I suppose to some people it always will. But I do think from a branding perspective, I think the whole Gibson Epiphone, Fender Squier, I think it's important. I mean, I'm just trying to think of a brand. Marshall, great example of a brand now where when someone says they've got a Marshall, you don't
have any idea.
Well, if you probably assume they've bought something pretty affordable from a guitar store. Yeah. You don't think they've got a JTM 45, that's for sure. Yeah. So I'm not convinced that
one of my favorite amps too.
Great amp, JTM 45, and absolutely, completely one of the best clean sounding amps I've ever heard, which you would never normally assume.
Just KT66s, that big round note. I mean, I don't know. That's a whole nother subject.
So look, we'll do a little bit of playing. Are there any questions that I haven't asked you that you sort of think to yourself, we should talk about this?
We like really went around. You got me from 9 years old up to present day. So I think, other than the age of my daughters,
I would fully expect not to be allowed to talk about things like that. So look, check out the Morgan range. I said I'm going to do a little bit of playing now. Maybe we might get one or two of the other guys in as well, do a bit of playing, just so that we can mix things up. I know what we haven't talked about. Pedals.
Oh yeah.
We'll just do 2 minutes on pedals. Now pedals was like, this is how everybody makes themselves a millionaire, isn't it? They just start a pedal company. But so you had a few, and now you have two, and
yeah. Well, the thing, it was like, okay, this black fuzz pedal and the overdrive pedal are the two pedals that I've always made. They both use a silicon transistor. They're discrete components. Meaning, okay, like a tube screamer uses an op amp to get its drive from. An op amp is a voltage-driven device, right? So that op amp is always going to kind of give you what it gives you. As you turn down the volume on your guitar, it'll clean up some, but it really won't react the way a current-driven device, which is what these are using, does. So if you turn on that fuzz, right, the fuzz...
I've turned the reverb off. So neck pickup.
So it'll get fuzz. This is a fuzz for guys that don't like fuzz, right? So it'll do a lot of like it'll do that big fat woolly thing like a good fuzz face, right? We just turn up that gain a little bit, get it to about 9 o'clock. Yeah, there we go.
Whoa!
But the cool thing about it is as you back off your volume control on your guitar, you'll get all kinds of different levels of overdrive and clean.
It's not. I see what you say. It's a fuzz for guys that don't like fuzz. You know,
Yeah.
that kind of. It's not quite. It feels like you're a bit more in control than you maybe are with some other fuzzes.
Right, and the harder you hit this one, the more you'll get out of it.
Need to tune my guitar, but yes. So that's the fuzz, which I like. And how does the overdrive differ?
The overdrive differs in we use a different silicon transistor in a different clipping circuit.
Right.
So it's along the same lines as far as the feel, right? So back off your volume, cleans up super well, but there's no tone control in it. So when you hear the term transparent overdrive, this is truly a transparent overdrive. What it's doing is acting like you're just giving the amp a little more gain or like adding an extra channel to the amplifier.
Right, let's have a little listen to that. Reverb down a bit. I appreciate that might be a bit too much for some people. So let's just, between the two, this is the fuzz. This is the drive. I wouldn't have even. They just sound like two versions of Drive to me, as opposed to
right.
you know, maybe one being very big
like
muffy or
yeah,
like that.
that's super that cool. I love that tone, that big fuzz, like just like a fuzz that you can't get away from. But these are definitely in the range for guys that are just, you know, they've never found a use for that type of like a big muff or a fuzz face or.
Right. Well, look, I appreciate you coming around, especially the 3 o'clock start this morning.
Yeah.
I'll put links underneath this video in the description section to where you go find out more about Morgan. As I said, there's quite a lot of amps in the range and the two pedals and stuff like that. So go check them out. I hope you've enjoyed hearing Joe talk about his philosophies on amp building and how he kind of came to do it. But yeah, come down to Andertons. We've always got plenty of Morgan amps in stock, so you can have a little play on those and decide what you like for yourself. But thank you, sir, for coming in.
Yeah,
it's a pleasure again. And maybe I'll see you at Sun and Nan as well.
Yeah, a couple of weeks, Nashville.
Yeah,
it's going to be a good time.
All right. Anyway, see you guys. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time. Hey everybody, thanks for watching the Andertons Guitar YouTube channel. If you're a drummer or a keyboard player or interested in music technology, you might find one of our other channels interesting, and I'll put details of those in the description below. If you want to find out more about the products we've just featured, please click here. If you'd like to buy a t-shirt like this, please click here. If you want to watch another video on our guitar channel, click down here. And to subscribe to our guitar channel, click here. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.